Hi, this is Mike Casey for San Mateo County History Stories. You know, the story in World War II of the attack on Pearl Harbor by the Japanese and the subsequent volunteering of 1 million of Americans for military service before they were even drafted is pretty well known. What is not so well known is that millions of Americans also volunteered their dogs for military service. And furthermore, that story of how the family pooch went from playing fetch in the backyard to going on to sentry duty had a San Mateo connection, and more specifically, a San Carlos connection. Now, the story of dogs in military service goes way back. There were many armies that employed dogs in different military jobs. But in the American Army, that never was the case, except for sled dogs in Alaska. And a sort of whimsical story of a Sergeant Stubby, mixed breed pit bull, who in many capacities in World War I, he was a stowaway. He got to Europe by accident, but there were stories of him thwarting a mustard gas attack and capturing a German spy by the seat of his pants. But other than that, the connection between dogs and the U.S. military was not there. In fact, the story of dogs in World War II service had a civilian impetus. The American Kennel Club and an organization called Dogs for Defense really encouraged the U.S. military to get dogs involved in service during World War II. When the Army finally agreed to do that, that job was given over to the Quartermaster Corps. Colonel F.A. Coaster had 5 different sites in the United States where dogs were going to be trained for military service. 4 of them were already established military bases, but the 5th one was here, right here in San Carlos. It was the site of the old H&H Ranch, which was about 2.5 miles west of the center of San Carlos. I'm standing here by the San Carlos History Museum, the old firehouse, and the firehouse that was built in 1940, because the original trainers, until they had permanent headquarters, were stationed out of this firehouse. The Devonshire Country Club was a service center for the military personnel training the dogs. And the San Francisco watershed lands to the west of here and private estates were used for field training the dogs. Now, this operation took place between 1942 and 1944. The training took about 8 to 12 weeks. During the course of that 2 years, over 4,500 dogs were trained here, and 2,500 military personnel were responsible for their training. Nationally, there were 20,000 dogs volunteered, 10,000 were trained, and actually only about 2,000 saw military service. Some of the dogs that were volunteered were winnowed out because for camouflage problems. They could not be camouflaged properly because of the color of their coat. Other dogs were not adaptable to training. It came down to really 5 primary breeds: the Belgian Sheepdog, German Shepherd, Giant Schnauzers, Farm Collies, and Dobermans. Those were primarily the dogs that were trained. Now, the training involved obviously obedience training, but also adaptability to military gunfire, riding in military vehicles, and also being able to wear a gas mask. The jobs they were looking for involved scouts, sentries, sled dogs, also messengers, and mine detection. During that time, most of the dogs, after they were trained, were sent off to the Pacific and to the Asian theaters. Some of them went to the Coast Guard. And when you think about the training of dogs and the service of dogs in the military, think about all the stories you hear during wartime. People bonding, buddies bonding in foxholes, heroism where one buddy saves another, or the heartbreak of losing one of your buddies in warfare. And then returning back home and making the adjustment to civilian life again. Well, think of all those stories. All of them could be told about the dogs that served in World War II. There are many stories where the dogs had similar stories to their human counterparts. Now, a lot of people in the older generation might say to younger generations, you know, things were different then. Things are not the same. And in the case of dogs serving in the military, I think this is quite true, because after this experience, the Army began, and all military services procured their own dogs, trained them, and they became the property of the military. So the notion that people would volunteer their dogs for military service now seems quaint, but it did happen during World War II, and there was a San Mateo County and a San Carlos connection. I'm Mike Casey, and I'll see you next time on San Mateo County History Stories.